The purpose of this video is to help you to understand that an eating disorder is about feelings, it's not about food. The food is a symptom, it is not the cause. It's sometimes difficult to understand that, but if you try and liken that to somebody who may have a problem with alcohol, they will use the alcohol as a way of control and obliterating the difficulties that they're facing. What someone will do with an eating disorder, they use their food as a way of coping. And I'd just like to share something that's been written by a lady in her 40s. The simplest way I can describe myself is likening me to a house. Somewhere in my footings there are cracks, which I believed happened in my childhood. Unfortunately, numerous stressful and upsetting events exaggerated those cracks, my walls began to crumble and my roof fell in. I believe the most effective way is to start to deal with the issues in my past and secure my footings. It would be pointless concentrating on my eating disorder, i.e. mending my roof, when in time the cracks in my footings will cause the roof to fall in again. I think that really explains really well that it is the underlying issues that actually perpetuate the eating disorder. And a lot of people engage in services and they get quite despondent because they're not talking about their eating disorder. And I think the message is that they won't probably talk about the eating disorder because it's trying to understand what's going on for you underneath and why you're using this eating disorder as a way of coping. A person who starves themselves suffering from anorexia will evaluate themselves to a body weight and shape, and they feel that if they reduce their weight they're going to be happier, but in truth they're not, because the more they reduce the weight their problems are still going to be there. Somebody who actually binge eats, they will use food as an emotional comfort, and they will continue to use that as a coping strategy for their problem. Someone who has bulimia will have the same emotional feelings when somebody binge eats, but sadly they purge and rid themselves of the food as a way of controlling body weight and shape. So it becomes an evaluation between body weight and shape, and the eating disorder becomes that coping strategy. So why do people develop eating disorders? There is a common theme connected with eating disorders, and that is that it is very closely connected with low self-esteem. And basically it can be anything that causes that problem. Somebody who has anorexia, when their self-esteem is at crisis level, they have a false belief that by managing body weight and shape, that's going to make them happier. And in truth it's not. Because if you think of a ballpark figure of say 7 stone, they strive to get to 6.5, the problems are still there. They strive to get to 6, the problems are still there. So they will strive and strive, will never ever achieve what weight they want to be. And all the time they're going down to very, very low weights, then their organs may be compromised in doing that. Someone who actually binge eats, what happens in a binge is that the food is usually high sugar, high carb, and it hits the serotonin at the base of the brain, and that heightens, and it gives them a feeling of euphoria whereby their problems just dissolve. But whether they're binge eating or whether they're bulimia, whether they're ridding themselves of that food or whether they're not, when they come down from that all-time high, they feel very, very low indeed. They feel guilt, they feel shame, and their confidence is at rock bottom. What do they do to go back into that feeling of well-being? They will go back into a binge. And what happens? They get embroiled in a circle of binging and purging and binging again. And it's a very, very difficult cycle to get out of. Often people say about being in control, but the irony of that is that are they really in control, or is the eating disorder in control of them? I think a lot of people have a misunderstanding about the recovery. You know, people sometimes think they have to make a full recovery, and they certainly do. It's about gaining that management back over their eating disorder and being in control, and not the eating disorder being in control of them. I'd just like to share a few of the comments that people have actually said to me over the time. Some people say they feel ashamed, some people say they can't concentrate, that they feel cold. Will they still be able to have children? They can't control what other people say about them. The only thing they can control is the food. They often feel very unhappy. They often hate themselves. They often feel very isolated and alone. when will their periods restart? And very sadly, some people actually say they don't want to be here anymore, they don't want to live. And that, I think, is the hardest thing to hear, and I know as a mum that was the hardest thing for me to cope with. There is a mortality rate of 20% of people who die every year from their eating disorder, either from a direct result of that or through suicide, and they are staggering statistics. Let's talk now about the triggers. What may cause an eating disorder? And for some people, this is a very important question. I think for a lot of people, they may never find out. But for us, it's definitely top of the list was bullying. Our daughter was badly bullied at school, and it had a detrimental effect on her well-being. It may be an inability to fit in with peer groups, it may be relationship problems, it may be the pressure to succeed, and we often find that this is a massive area, and the pressure to be perfect. And especially amongst university students who set the bar that high that nothing short of perfection will do. And in trying to reach that perfection, they often find it very difficult to cope with. The diet that has gone to extreme, the throwaway comment, bereavement or loss of a loved one, divorce, media, all of these may be things that cause an eating disorder. But one of the things that we were told caused an eating disorder was abuse. And I'd just like to get this message out there. I'm not undermining any of the authorities, but when we were told our daughter may have been abused, I know as a mum how that felt. And it was an horrendous experience. And I'd just like to clarify that people who do have an eating disorder don't necessarily mean that being abused. Yes, abuse happens, whether that be physical, mental abuse or sexual, but that doesn't mean to say that everybody who has an eating disorder has been abused.